Hello, Callum. We're doing your Reflection Interview 2, Research and Planning.
Sounds great.
So do you want to start it off with what were your main areas of investigation?
I would say for this project, my obviously my main attributes I wanted to research were definitely related to lighting. So that involves types of lighting rigs, setups, and how sort of lights work and as a whole. I'd also say I needed to do research on
Do you want to start with the lighting? So like, where did you go?
I just forgot. I forgot everything, bro. My brain.
Should we start with the lighting? Where did you go to get research on lighting? What different lighting styles were you looking at, and how did you use that in your project?
Well, I guess firstly, I wanted to know sort of how lighting varies.
Okay.
You know, I wanted to know how they differ. You know, what affects the color. You know, how many lights you need in certain equations. What you need for certain genres of photography, for example. And because this was a fashion-based project, I obviously wanted to put as much research into it as possible. So this took me to, you know, a 3-point lighting rig setup, which is what I practiced and used during my project.
And this was all centered around portrait and fashion photography.
Yeah, so very sort of flat, very sort of open, negative space. You know, no shadows, no, you know, asymmetry. It was all just perfect on purpose.
Very kind of scientific in the way of doing things.
Very, very high fashion.
And where did you, what research sources did you use for that?
This could be anything from just articles to YouTube videos, all sorts of social media, obviously, so I could get, you know, personal opinions. But yeah.
And did that change, through the research, did that change your project in any way? Or did you have this like same idea in your head?
The idea for most of what I wanted the outcome to be, so this was sort of what the magazine was supposed to look like, some design elements and the lighting and such, that was always very, you know, very solidified from the start. Mm-hmm. But I would definitely say, because, you know, attributes like my obviously my lighting knowledge was very, very varied, from very minimal things in some areas to knowing a lot in others. But I definitely, expanding that definitely helped me with my final piece, 100%.
Nice. And were there any challenges or problems that needed to be solved through your research? I know you were practicing stuff. Did that?
Yeah, I was practicing both the the aperture triangle or the exposure triangle.
And that was another form of research. That wasn't outside of lighting. You were looking at exposure triangles.
Yeah. So that and lenses were two things that I was also looking at. And I guess a sort of problem that I faced was that I was sort of unsure of how to sort of compare different, you know, f-stops and different lenses and how they work. And I realized that I sort of needed, the background is very important, the foreground, the middle ground and the background were very key to sort of learning and understanding how they differ. And I feel like I could have done a better job. And it's definitely something I want to revisit at some point before attempting anything sort of in the same region of.
And did you have to research? Did you have to go back? So researching before you started, then after your project, did you have to go back to look at other sources for that, or?
Yeah, okay. A couple of sources, but the majority was done beforehand. So obviously I had an idea of what to do when turned up at the shoot.
Okay. And then any research for the actual prints? So you have the photographs themselves, and then you've actually got the magazine as a whole. What research sources did you have for, like, what did you investigate for the actual print aspect of it?
Well, for the actual print, previously in the past before, I've edited photos. I've done candid, nature photography. I've done things outside of school that's gotten me used to Lightroom. So I was used to editing photos. I went straight into that as soon as they were done. But with other elements like InDesign,
Yeah,
I wasn't very familiar with InDesign, and I had to put in a decent chunk of research in because I've used Adobe before, but I know that there are a lot of sort of like similarities between a lot of them. They reuse things in certain places and they have the same sort of format. They just differ in different ways. But that was definitely a big thing.
What the different buttons do and stuff.
Yeah, so I had to put in a big chunk of that, of research into that, as well as sort of grids.
Did you have any challenges with InDesign in particular that you had to go away and look at? Is there anything that stood out that was particularly challenging?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this was like an InDesign thing on purpose or if this was just a personal problem that I came across. But there were just numerous errors.
Okay.
Like it was just all over the place. It was telling me and things weren't syncing across the cloud.
Oh, because you're working on two different machines.
Yeah, and then every time I'll try open it on something else, those exact like fonts and files wouldn't be imported. I don't know why just the file would be on the cloud and not everything else in it. It was a whole mess.
Okay.
But I figured it out in the end.
Figured it out. Is there anywhere did you just persevere with it yourself, or did you have to go away and look at some tutorials or something to figure that out?
I would say it was mainly perseverance.
Okay.
Because I'm aware that stuff like this can have issues, but I did look up a couple of things. So obviously I didn't lose all of my data.
And were there any, you mentioned the photo editing, was there anything you wanted to improve on? You said you came with a lot of knowledge, but was there anything you wanted to add to that existing knowledge that you had?
Yeah, because I would say majority of the photos that I've edited before were for the pure sake of looking in a certain aesthetic way.
Okay.
Which obviously applies to this magazine, but obviously my idea for the photos was that I wanted it to be very high fashion, like centered in the sense that it looks very mainstream.
Like clean.
But very clean, very open, very nice and bright. Yeah. But I wanted the poses, and I just wanted little elements to be more editorial focused. And
cool. Less stylized.
I wasn't used to editing stuff like that, so I obviously did a little bit of research. But,
nice. Yeah. And then is there anywhere you wanted it to, like, it could have gone further? Anywhere you wanted it to, you could have improved in certain areas?
With the magazine as a whole?
With the magazine, well, the magazine as a whole, the photo editing, lighting setups.
Yeah, actually. This is a combination of both the editing, the aperture I used, and the backdrop. Yeah. Basically, I was already very much over budget after the shoot. Yeah. So I didn't want to spend more money on paper backdrops. Yeah. Also, I thought that keeping the backdrop the same for everyone sort of kept everyone in this, community circle. Yeah. But then you could also see the standout and color and the theme of the entire thing. But
did you originally want to play around with backdrop colors? Or it hadn't you hadn't thought about it?
Yeah, I wanted to see how it would change things, but obviously I wanted there to be, a decent amount of cohesion between the images and the themes. I wanted there to be some sort of theme and, repetition. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to differ the images and, the environments too much. But yeah, I might have made it slightly different if I could go back now, but I would have needed more planning, and I'm still very happy with the outcome. So.
And you mentioned fonts earlier as well. How did you come up with the font that you were using?
So the majority of the magazine sort of uses this rich font. I think it's a sans serif font, and it's very, very sort of, I don't know how to explain it. It looks very polished, very sort of cursive, and it looks very luxurious. And that was taken from inspiration from mainstream magazines like Vogue and such. They use very nice-looking, rich writing. Okay. But I used 4 in total. I used a really bold, spaced out, very blocky font in the typography
Yeah.
for the different numbered sections for each of the color sections. And I also used this more bubbly, sort of cloud-like font for the quotes, the custom quotes, coloured quotes I made up for each section as well. So there was definitely a variety, and I thought it worked well with the theme and the overall editorial approach.
Cool. Was there anything else you like to push it even further? Like, would you have liked to do anything more with it, or are you happy where it was?
I'm very happy with the way it turned out, but I wish I could have seen what it looked like physically before I got it printed and before I finalized it, because I thought that the writing came out a little bit too big.
Okay, because it's different looking at it on the screen versus, so if you had the opportunity to do a test print, you think that would have been more, okay.
Yeah, so slightly smaller font.
Nice.
But yeah.
And then overall, as a project, time management, any other issues that you came up against?
Yeah, actually. What, project as a whole or research specifically?
Research specifically.
Problems, I wouldn't say so much problems. It was just sort of knowing what to research.
Okay.
Because obviously it was very different to all my past projects, which have all been sort of moving image and, you know, very digital and editing, you know, heavy and such.
Did you not know where to kind of start? It was a different starting place.
Yeah, like I was unsure of what things I wanted to improve, other than lighting being the big one that I hadn't put in a lot of hours into learning, you know, in the past. But
and did you start with, lighting was the first thing you mentioned, did you start with researching the photos before the magazine? Was the photos the sort of main thing you were researching initially? Or was it in the context of it being in a magazine? Or did you want to treat them as two separate things to start with?
Well, I definitely started with the photos and how they would turn out and how I wanted them to look.
So you wanted the photos to sort of drive the project?
I was doing some side, you know, I was doing some skills builders and testing grids and layouts of what I would want it to look like. But obviously, without the photos, I would have, you know, I wanted to do that second. So at least I had photos to work with, so I could mess with the.
And did those dictate, did the photos dictate the style of the magazine rather than you having the style of the magazine dictating the photos?
I think it's very 50-50.
Okay.
Because I feel like everything is very complementary in the sense that like each section the photos in is correspondent to you know, the color palette and the overall look of everything sort of fits. So it's like you could take one element away, whether that be the design or the photos, either way, vice versa. And I feel like it can still give off the same, you know, theme, same vibe. So no, I think it's very, very split.
Okay. You happy with that?